The moment God begins to change you, it does not feel like a blessing. It feels like everything is breaking. The things that once brought comfort no longer do. The life you carefully built feels suddenly hollow. If you are in a season that you cannot explain, a season that feels more like ending than beginning, stay with this. What you are about to hear may be the most clarifying thing you encounter in this season of your life. What you are walking through has a name, it has a pattern, and it is written in detail across the oldest pages of Scripture. Spiritual awakening is one of the most misrepresented experiences in the Christian life. We speak of it in triumphant terms, a moment of sudden clarity, a rush of peace, a life changed overnight. And sometimes it begins that way. But for most people, for most of the men and women in Scripture, the awakening did not feel like an opening. It felt like a collapse. Job lost everything before he encountered God at a depth he never had before. Joseph descended into a pit before he was raised to a palace. Elijah called down fire from heaven, then collapsed under a tree and asked to die. Paul was struck blind before he could truly see. The pattern is not accidental. It is not a malfunction of faith. It is the method. In this message, we are going to walk through 7 stages of spiritual awakening. Stages the Bible traces with precision, but that few teachers name directly. Not because the truth is hidden, but because it is uncomfortable. Because it asks something of us that goes far deeper than attendance, performance, or polished belief. Every spiritual awakening begins with a disruption, not with a gentle invitation, with a shaking. Something you relied on is removed. A relationship ends. A plan dissolves. A certainty you held for years simply falls apart. And what is most disorienting is that the thing removed was often something you believed God gave you. This is where most people conclude they have done something wrong, that God is punishing them, that they have moved outside of His will. But consider Job. In Job chapter 1 verse 8, it is God Himself who draws the adversary's attention to Job. God initiates. God points. And what follows is the systematic dismantling of everything Job had built his identity around. The disruption was not the absence of God. It was the presence of a God unwilling to let Job stay in a version of faith that was smaller than what he had prepared for him. The first stage does not feel like grace. It feels like loss. But it is the beginning. After the disruption comes what may be the most difficult stage of all: the silence. Prayer feels like speaking into a wall. Scripture that once moved you now reads as flat and distant. Elijah knew this silence. The man who stood on Mount Carmel and watched fire fall from heaven. The man who defeated 450 prophets in a single afternoon, ran from one threatening woman and collapsed in the wilderness. In 1 Kings chapter 19, he says, "It is enough. Take away my life." This is not weakness. This is a man who has burned at full intensity and found that the fire he produced could not sustain him. The silence is not God's rejection of you. It is His refusal to compete with the noise that was filling the space where His voice belongs. The third stage is the one nobody preaches about: the stripping. Things are taken from your life that you did not offer. Titles, relationships, reputations you spent years building, the version of yourself you presented to the world. God sends the prophet to watch a potter at work. The potter shapes a vessel. The vessel is marred. And rather than discarding the clay, the potter folds it back into itself and begins again. forming something different, something better. God says immediately after, "O house of Israel, cannot I do with you as this potter?" The stripping is not destruction. It is the potter refusing to leave you in a shape that cannot hold what he intends to pour into you. Every identity that was built on human approval, on performance, on what you could produce, it must be reformed. Not because you are worthless, because you are valuable enough to be reworked. The fourth stage is the test, and it is not what most people expect. We assume that God tests us to discover what is in us, that He is gathering information. But Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 2 removes that assumption entirely. Moses tells Israel that God led them 40 years in the wilderness, to humble them, to prove them, to know what was in their heart. The test is not for God's information. It is for yours. Joseph did not discover his God-given purpose in comfort. He discovered it in the pit. He confirmed it in the prison. And in Genesis 39, verse 21, in the middle of imprisonment, wrongly accused, abandoned by those he had served faithfully, the text says simply, "But the Lord was with Joseph." Not when the doors opened inside the prison. The test is not evidence that God has forgotten you. It is the terrain on which He reveals to you what you are made of and what He placed inside you before you were born. Every genuine spiritual awakening eventually brings you to a confrontation, not with your circumstances, not with the people who have wronged you, but with yourself. When everything external has been stripped away, when the noise is gone and the crowd has thinned, what remains is the truest version of what you actually believe, not what you have always said. Jacob knew this confrontation. In Genesis 32, alone on the bank of the Jabbok River, he wrestled through the night with a divine presence. And at dawn, that presence asked him a single question. "What is your name?" In Hebrew, the name Jacob means supplanter, deceiver. To speak it was to own it, to stop hiding behind the blessing he had stolen, the identity he had constructed, the man he had pretended to be for decades. Only after that honest confrontation did God rename him. Israel, one who has strived with God and prevailed. The confrontation is not condemnation. It is the moment God asks you to stop pretending, so that He can introduce you to who you actually are. Stage 6 is the hinge point of the entire process. It is the moment everything turns on, and it is the most misunderstood word in the Christian life. Surrender. We hear that word and think of defeat, of waving a white flag, of giving up. But in Scripture, surrender is the most active, most courageous, most decisive thing a person can do. It is the choice to release your grip on the outcome. Not because you stop caring, but because you trust the one who holds what you cannot. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus knelt among ancient olive trees in the deepest anguish of His earthly life, and He prayed, "Father, if Thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but Thine be done." Luke 22, verse 42. That was not resignation. That was the most theologically informed prayer ever spoken. It was the prayer of a son who understood that the Father's design exceeded what human sight could perceive in that moment. And it was that surrender that releasing of the outcome that made everything which followed possible. Surrender is not the end of your story. It is the hinge on which your story turns toward its true direction. The seventh stage is the one you have been moving toward through every difficult stage before it, the emergence. And here is what Scripture makes plain. You do not emerge the same. You are not supposed to. The person who comes out of a genuine spiritual awakening is not the polished version of the person who went in. They are a reworked version, a renamed version, a version that carries the mark of the process and is stronger for it. Jacob emerged from the riverbank with a limp and a new name. Joseph emerged from prison with wisdom forged in suffering and a position that would save nations. Elijah emerged from the wilderness with renewed direction and one of the most significant prophetic assignments in the Old Testament. Paul emerged from blindness and became the most prolific voice of the early church. Each of them bore the marks of what they had endured. None of them were diminished by it. Romans 8, verse 28 says, "And we know that all things work together for good, to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose." All things, not some things, not comfortable things, not things that make immediate sense. All things. The emergence is not the end of difficulty, but it is the beginning of seeing that the difficulty was always purposeful. This means something very specific for you, right now, in this exact season. If you are in the disruption, if something you built has collapsed and you cannot understand why, you are not being punished. You are in stage 1. The potter has not discarded you. He has put his hands on you. If you are in the silence, if prayer feels distant and God feels unreachable, you are not outside his attention. You are in the environment where his still, small voice becomes the loudest thing you have ever heard. Stay. Keep praying. Keep opening the word, even when it feels dry. If you are in the stripping, if you are in the testing, the confrontation, or the surrender, know this: every person in Scripture who was used significantly by God passed through exactly where you are standing, not around it, not above it, through it. Spiritual awakening is not the moment everything becomes easy. It is the moment everything becomes real. The fire does not consume what it is called to refine, and neither will this season consume you. God is not finished. He is not absent. He is not confused about what he is doing with your life. He is the potter. You are not broken clay. You are clay in the hands of the one who has never once produced something he did not intend. As a declaration of this understanding, type "I am being formed" in the comments and share this with someone who is in the middle of their wilderness season. They may not have words for what they are living through. Now they will.